Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Scotonomics. And here's my co-host, Kieran van Sweden. Hi, Kieran. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, William?
Yeah, not too bad. What have you been up to today? Anything of interest?
Really busy today. We've been busy working on a film, but we'll tell our viewers a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, so you were doing some filming, and where were you filming?
I was filming in Edinburgh.
Okay, interesting stuff. It's like a little teaser. We have much more information on that at a later date. Today we've got a wonderful interview that you and I did. It was actually a few weeks ago now, because I was editing the video today and I could see my Christmas tree in the background. So this is a couple of weeks old, but we've actually persuaded our guest to come on afterwards and answer any questions live. So because it's a couple of weeks out of date, we thought it'd be really good. And there's been a major policy development, which is the levelling up proposals, which have been released by the UK government. So we thought it'd be fantastic to get our guest's view on that. So who is our guest tonight, Kieran, and what are they covering?
So we have Neil Mcinroy joining us tonight, and he's an economist and senior fellow for the global advancement of community wealth building at the Democracy Collaborative. And he is also currently seconded to the Scottish Government from the Centre for Local Economic Strategies.
And it's all about community wealth building, but we touched on so many other different areas, some kind of macro stuff and some really micro stuff, right into the economy and local government and the role of the individual. It's a fascinating session. We've got a full 50 minutes, and then Neil will be on for live questions. So any questions you've got, please drop them in. Welcome to you if you're on Facebook or YouTube. Both of you can drop your questions in on both those platforms. I've gone a little bit fuzzy there, and we'll ask Neil to ask them at the end. So enjoy the show, and we'll see you all afterwards.
Neil Mcinroy, welcome to Scotonomics. Thanks for joining us today. So Neil is a senior fellow for the global advancement of community wealth building at the Democracy Collaborative. He's also seconded to the Scottish Government from CLES, which is the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. I noted that you are inspired by the idea of the Greek word for economy, economas, and really keeper of the house is how that translates. And you take inspiration. Can you tell me why you're inspired by thinking about economy in that way?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, economos, just say Greek word, keeper of the household, and what it talks is about the essence of what economy should be about. It should be about our home. It should be part of what we are as human social beings. But of course, it's become detached from all that. The economy is something out there, something we have to fit into, where it's not. The economy is a social science. It's something we can construct, and we can construct it any way we want. And in fact, we've become detached from the economy. So the idea that we need to bring the economy back home to our lives, to our communities, to our hearts, is exactly what we need to do, because as sure as we all know, the economy is running away here. It's eating the planet, and it doesn't serve us. We need to get that economy back home to serve us and work the way we want it to work.
Do you think that's a result of instigation of neoclassical economic thinking in the 1800s?
It's part of the maturing of capitalism, really, in the sense it's become detached from our lives. And, it's part of just the evolution of capitalism and the evolution of part of the discipline. I mean, the discipline itself has not helped itself. It's served capitalism. And of course, the discipline needs to actually get back to its roots, like the economos, and start serving us and serving the people. So there's many reasons why it's become detached, but the big reason is the maturing of capitalism and how it, in a sense, serves the interest of capital and those with capital, that the interests of people and communities, and of course, most importantly, the planet itself.
So would you like to see what you describe as a new municipalism?
Well, there's many dimensions of what we need to hone in on here. And, the key thing for me is, how do we bring that economy back home? And community wealth building is a key to that. It says, hold on here, let's stop the economy where wealth, what was it, 10 of the richest men in the world own the same as half the population of the world. A huge concentration of wealth. Wealth is the defining feature of the economy. Who has it? Where does it go? And how do more people get their hands on it? Community wealth building says, let's repatriate some of that wealth. Let's start making sure that wealth truly works for our people, our communities. And in that, there's a whole range of aligned sister movements, if you like, which includes the well-being economy, includes things like new municipalism, which in a sense is saying, let's build our let's build our cities and our places in ways that truly work for us, and where the grassroots communities have more of a say in the actual activity that takes place in that locality. So there's a whole range of aligned progressive movements. And the moment we are in history, and the moment we are with the crisis we're in, all those aligned progressive movements need to get their act together and start working more effectively together. That is the moment we're in. And things like new municipalism is a key part of that. But we're struggling because the progressive movements are not aligning themselves effectively enough. And in a sense, there's some who don't want us to align. The forces of capital maybe don't want us to align because they want to keep the way that it is and keep the plutocrats and the wealthy retain the situation as it is.
So you have seen some of this at work in Barcelona, where William lives. Can you tell us a little bit more what's happening with this in Barcelona?
Barcelona have a new municipalism agenda, which in a sense, it's building the city for its people, and that includes the economy, the social, the cultural life of that city. It's trying to create a stand against, if you like, the forces of global capital and how it flows around and invests and disinvests. Now, like any world city, it struggles in that because the forces are so strong, but it is a poplar tree, if you like. It is a windbreak against some of that ravages of investment and disinvestment that can be so damaging for communities. So it's trying to bring the power back to people. I mean, Ada Colau says that politics is an agora, not a temple. Politics is a space that we all need to be part of, not something that we kind of go to the town hall and it's a temple we all look up to as a high. And also, the economy itself should be an agora. The economy itself is a place that we all need to contribute and have a democratic say in, not something that a temple, a cathedral that we go to, that we fit within. It's something we can construct and we need to make. And Barcelona is on that journey. But of course, there's many other places around the world that are on a similar community wealth building journey as well. Different cities are different cultures, and some cities have a much more stronger culture of debate and basic democracy in terms of discussion. And Barcelona is a beacon of that. It is a very discursive, and everything's up for grabs. Planning is a spectator sport, really, in Barcelona. It's a spectator sport in Portland and Oregon. These are the debate is there. But let's be under no illusion. Just because the debate's there, where does the power lie? The real power. Where does the real ownership model lie? A lot of Barcelona is still a beacon to extractive fossil capitalism. It's still playing part of that game, and part of that demos. It doesn't actually affect some of the fundamental decisions about where investment lands and who gains from that wealth. So we do have but many cities, I think, are equally as progressive as Barcelona, but they're maybe less trendy, if you like, in that sense. Portland, I think, is one of those cities in Oregon. I think our own cities in the UK, there's progressive activity, which sometimes I think we're too humble about, that's around. There's great debates that go on in our cities about what the future should be. It's a different cultural vibe, perhaps a less antagonistic, less disruptive, less universal, but it's still there, and we need to build that up, I feel.
Key players in community wealth building are what you term anchor institutions. Can you describe these more to our audience and what they actually are?
Community wealth building, as I said before, is really interested in wealth. Who has it? Where does it go? And how do we make sure more people get their hands on it? It's a fundamental feature of place and our economy. So if you think about wealth, which organizations or individuals can we actually have more of a say on in terms of the wealth they have? And straight away, you move to those large public institutions in place, the hospitals, the universities, the local authorities, the police services. They own a lot of land, they employ a lot of people, and they buy a lot of things. The Scottish economy, for instance, probably 35% of the whole Scottish economy is driven through those anchor institutions. Even in places like Barcelona, it's probably 30-40% of the whole economy is driven by that public money. So that is something that we can actually have some say over in terms of where that wealth goes. So if a hospital, if a university, for instance, is buying new IT equipment, is it buying it from some sweatshop in China, or is it buying it from some ethical, sustainable, green, living wage, fair tax company based in Dundee or based in wherever? These decisions of their purchasing matter a lot about how the economy works and who it works for. So community wealth building says, when these anchor organizations are buying things, can they buy things in a way that considers the wider relationship of that purchase to the economy and who benefits from it? And that can create quite significant dividends and significant benefit. Also, who do they employ? Are they employing people from maybe the deprived areas of the city? Or are they just employing whoever? What about the land and property assets? Are they selling them off to developers? Or are they creating urban parks or community spaces? So the question of their wealth and what those anchors do with their wealth is a very important element to considering how an economy works and who it works for, and how we bring the economy back home to our people and our communities.
In the UK, I would say there's an overt concentration of anchor institutions in London, which you would think would bring a lot of wealth, very specifically around the area of London, which it does to a great extent. But there are quite a lot of areas that are missed in London as well that suffer deep poverty. Why is this? How are these anchor institutions spending in the UK's capital?
I would say that, firstly, I agree with you. You know, there's a lot of London bashing, and I think that's, you know, there's a lot of big city bashing. London has every city has poverty and disadvantage, and London has it equally to many other cities. Some desperate poverty in London, which is unacceptable, of course. There is huge wealth in London, of course, huge concentrations of wealth, and that is supported by a whole architecture of legislation, policy decisions, archaic traditions, establishment, and so forth. The role of anchor organisations is only one part of the economy, and arguably London could do a lot more with its anchor organisations to ensure that not only are Londoners benefiting, but the wider UK economy is the wider UK economy is benefiting from the actions of those anchor organisations in terms of what they do with the land and property, who they employ, and what they purchase. I think if those anchor organisations have some form of democratic money, if they're spending taxpayers' money, if they have some form of democratic oversight, it's imperative and essential that they are beacons of virtue and well-being in their economic activities. And they're not, by and large. So they need to become much more. Every single pound they spent is our money, and it needs to make sure that it truly benefits the economy, the planet, the people, the communities that are around them. And there's a lot of that London organisations to do, but also lots of organisations in Scotland need to do better on this as well.
It's quite interesting, Neil, because you mentioned Beacon, and I remember the Beacon councils in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And I actually worked in the local government department in London, and it was all about best value. And I think that was a very a neoliberal conservative, and then tied into the Labour government policy, which was you have to get the kind of bang for your buck. And I think that fundamentally destabilized a lot of these anchor organizations who were told to go with the service that was the cheapest, and that in some way we would get best value for that. Has that changed, or do you still think there is that understanding that it's all about paying the least amount for the services that our anchor organizations and other public sector organizations are using?
That's a really good point. That I mean, community wealth building is a direct attack on that idea of value on cost alone. In fact, it's got so bad, William, that whole idea of cost is what is assumed is the cheapest is not the cheapest, because it's a monopoly. That's where you get those big contractors who are the only people who can service because they have a wraparound service. And it's, because there's so few entrants into the marketplace. There's no competition. It's a virtual monopoly. So it's not even the most cost effective. They're just the only people that can do it because they've bought over everything else. So community wealth building is a direct attack on that. It's an attack on it's an attack on the notion that it's just about price. It's about the wider value, and the wider value you get from more entrants to the market through competition, but also the wider value in terms of well-being, in terms of looking after the planet, in terms of local economy, in terms of supporting ingenuity and creativity and the craft of individual communities and enterprises to do good things. It has that broader relational aspect to what a purchase brings. And it's a reimagination, but also practical action that starts to do that. But you're spot on to mention that. Best value was a curse, and it's still there. And it's used, I think, by those that say, oh, they cost more. We can't go there. It's going to cost us too much money. But you know that they're probably paying rubbish wages. They've probably got stitched up in terms of supply, and the supply. They're probably not doing good by the community. They're probably not doing good by the environment. And so it's a false economy, if you like, in terms of what they're actually say a big sort of back office company, logistics company went on that basis. It was just living contract to contract. But it's worse, of course. It's driven by shareholder dividend. And so it's all about the short-term, year-on-year dividends. And look at the care market, for instance, the social care market, where you've got huge players who are receiving perhaps double figures shareholder dividends. Meanwhile, the service is really poor. The workers are paid ridiculously low wages. It's an investment. This is how far our economies become detached from our lives, back away from our home and our hearts. It's not seen as looking after dignity and decency of our elderly relatives or in society. It's not about decency and dignity. It's about what is the dividend. That's no way to run an economy and run a core service, a foundational service like care. So that's why community wealth building argues it's for some bits of the economy, there should be no profit motive whatsoever. They should be taken out of private ownership, like care, like the utilities, like transport. There's no space for the market there. They need to be run effectively and efficiency for the people in the communities. And frankly, profit and shareholder dividend should have no place within that.
And you'd find Adam Smith backing you up on that as well. That's how it's incredible that we have got to a position where we see everything is up for the market. And this really is only something that's happened the last 30 years. But as I said, the fundamentally, the economists who established capitalism didn't think that the market should come into every single area. And those are examples where the market shouldn't be involved, and certainly shouldn't be leading the services, and very few economists would argue that. But here we are in a situation, especially in the United Kingdom, where everything is up for sale. And that's an important point we always try and make on Scotonomics, is that it'd be really interesting to hear your opinion of this. But you can look across the globe to try and find other countries who have given over so much to the market and who have privatized so much, and you won't see anyone who's done it to the extent that United Kingdom has. Is that a fair reflection of where the United Kingdom is compared to some of the other countries that you visit and you work with?
There's no doubt about it that the United Kingdom, broadly, the United Kingdom has allowed the penetration of capital and shareholder dividend quite deeply into much of its economic activity, including its public services. I was speaking to the mayor of Green Bay, which is a city in Wisconsin, and this is the land of the free, USA, and they own an amusement park, a municipally owned amusement park, like Strathclyde, what's it called? Strathclyde Country Park, the amusement. The city owns it. The city owns Green Bay Packers. It's community owned, or community and city owned, I think. The football team. The reason why is because they knew it was the most efficient way of doing it, the most beneficial way of doing it in terms of it's owned by the people. They knew if there was going to be make a return, it would come back to the people and to the civic and to the public, the local authority, the administration. This is the sensiblest, decent, most organised way of doing things. We have went into the cathedral of shareholder dividend and capitalism and said we're going to sit at the altar of this and do it this way, which has no basis in terms of decency, dignity, or what actually is the most effective way of doing it. So I agree. I think whether the UK is the most, I don't know, but it's certainly up there in terms of the extent to which shareholder supremacy has rides over citizen or community supremacy or individual supremacy. It's shareholder supremacy. It has the upper hand in these things.
Neil, it's interesting for me that you use water and hydrology analogies for wealth. Can you elaborate and give examples of this vision? I've got some examples that you wrote down, the faucets and the taps of wealth, and maybe you could go through these and talk to our audience about what you mean and your concerns about these particular things. So first, there's finance. Second, workforce. Third, spending. 4, land and property. And 5, ownership. So could you maybe go through these 5 points and talk about how these things affect our economy and what's your vision for improving our economy via these 5 different examples?
I'm a big fan of metaphors. I don't know why, but for me, they kind of make things clear. And so many economists have used the metaphor of water, hydrological systems as flows of wealth. We've had the metaphor trickle down, torrent down, trickle up, and this whole no. So if you think about wealth as flows, like a hydrological system, then you're thinking, well, okay, where does when I buy something, where's that money flowing to? And is it flowing to a loch here in my place, or is it flowing away out to the sea and somewhere else? How do I create dams or eddies that allow that money to flow to the people that need it the most, or the people that are suffering? How do we make that flow in a way that nourishes the planet rather than damages and floods things? So it kind of works sort of for me. And in that, in community wealth building, we think about different plumbing and different flows, and there's 5 different flows. And one is financial wealth. The second one is workforce, as you said. So it's like wages, if you like, that kind of wealth. There's land and property, a huge source of wealth and flow of money. Then it's procurement that we've touched upon before. It's that spending of your large public bodies. And then ownership. And ownership is the key one, because that's your reservoir and loch. Yeah, that's where things land and stick and can be corralled, the question of ownership. So in community wealth building, the tactics, the actions that are to think, how do we make sure across all those 5 elements that we're making sure there's a flow of wealth that definitely benefits communities? So opposed to relying on the big banks in terms of finance, you're thinking, can we think about community banks the Sparkassen banks we've got in Germany? Can we think about things like the Scottish National Investment Bank? Can we think about credit unions? Can we think about how we use our pension funds so that they actually benefit communities more rather than Dubai, nuclear warheads, fags, whatever it may be? So we're thinking about the flow of that financial architecture that truly benefits local people, communities. With workforce, you're thinking, well, hold on, can we make sure that when we pay wages, that it's a living wage, it's a real living wage, that people are treated with dignity, there's decency, there's unionisation, and that, in a sense, is Scotland's fair work agenda. When you think about land and property, you're thinking, well, how are we making sure that that land, which nobody really owns, in essence, it's the commons in a way, isn't it? It's like it's the planet that owns the land. Yeah, we're just sort of temporary stewards of it in a way. How are we making sure that that land truly benefits us and the people? And goodness knows, we've had a big history of how our land's been taken off us in the past in our fine country. So land reform and making sure that more communities can actually own that land and then put economic activity on it that benefits communities is another key element. And then you've got the question of ownership, and that is about supporting plural, inclusive forms of ownership, cooperatives, municipal ownership, mutuals, community businesses, social enterprises, the great countries of the world, the great places of the world, including places like Barcelona, have a high proportion of those types of inclusive ownership models because their shareholders are the workers. Their shareholders are the community. They're not somebody living in the Cayman Islands. They're your neighbour or your close neighbour. And that creates a natural flow, retention of wealth within localities and within communities. And so all those things are part of strategies. And the work that we do at the Democracy Collaborative, as well as the work in Scotland, is about advancing community wealth building and through those 5 bits of plumbing, if you like: the finance, the workforce, the procurement, the land and property, and ownership. And of course, there's places in Scotland that are on this journey now and pretty well advanced, like including North Ayrshire.
And I think that the Scottish Government, from what I read, are quite proactive towards encouraging cooperatives. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, I would say they are. I mean, they have the Cooperative Development Scotland as part of Scottish Enterprise, and there is a funding and support architecture for co-ops. For me, you can always do more, and I think Scotland should do more on co-ops, but it is pretty decent in international terms of what it does. I think we don't want to get too much into the debate about different types of co-ops, but I mean, co-op's just one ownership model, and Mondragon is one particular model, and it's a great one, but it's got a particular tradition and came out of a particular culture, post-Franco, particular different time. I'm more keen on smaller co-ops, but that's a personal penchant. I like co-ops that are more related to place. The big corporate type cooperatives, I think, can start to become
Unwieldy?
Unwieldy, yeah, and less sensitive. And it's I think it lends. There's a question of scale about co-ops, and I would say if they get too big, they lose some of their virtue. Too small, then they also lose some of their virtue as well. I think there's a kind of horse for courses thing here, but certainly erring towards the smaller rather than the big corporate type co-ops is the way to go. But Scotland is on this journey, and Scotland is, a beacon, I think, and should be increasingly a beacon for this drive for inclusive ownership, including co-ops across the world. It's got everything. We always think in Scotland. I do believe, and working in many different places, there is a cooperative spirit in Scotland. There is the Jock Tamson's Bairns thing, isn't there? We're all in this together, and I think there is in our traditions that natural collaborative ethos. I think we could do a lot more with it, and co-ops is a way, perhaps, for that to happen.
Yeah, I think Leslie Riddick touches on this in her book, and she, to a certain extent, explains perhaps our architecture. So many of us living in tenements and sharing front and back doors with each other, and how that perhaps contributes towards that feeling. But now that you're working with the Scottish Government, I wanted to know a little bit more about what you're seeing changing in Scotland, and also what's happening in North Ayrshire.
There's the well-being economy agenda in Scotland, which community wealth building is the practical means of delivering on that, and that is growing in significance. And we've got, the National Strategy of Economic Transformation, which obviously well-being economy will figure highly in that. So there is a receptive soil conditions, a receptive context here for progressive economics in Scotland. We need to make the case more. I mean, I'm a big fan of showing and telling and getting things done. And that, we can talk and talk and talk, but if you can say, look how that's changed somebody's life by doing it different, that's the best thing you can do. I'm not one of these think tank academic. I can do all that, but I'm much more about the practical element to it. So what's happening in Scotland is there's 6 areas that are practically looking to deliver on community wealth building, and North Ayrshire has been going longer than more of them. It's been going 2 years now, and they've adopted an action plan which includes those 5 pillars, those pipes of wealth, and they're creating actions across the piece on all of them. Actions on their pension fund, action on fair work, action on progressive procurement, action on land and property, including community energy activity taking place there, and then ownership, supporting cooperative development and so forth, including an employee ownership of a hotel on Arran, as well as other employee ownership stuff. So I say turn the dial. They're turning the dial every day around this community wealth building agenda. It's corporately centred in the council. So it's not a fluffy little thing away over there. It's right at the heart of the council. They're a community wealth building council. And also they've now linked in with a range of different anchor organisations in Ayrshire, not just North Ayrshire, but the wider Ayrshire. They've got buy-in from South and East Ayrshire now. They've got a commission, so a commission for community wealth building. I should also say they've got an anchor charter, which is a commitment of all the anchors in North Ayrshire to advance the kind of things we're talking about. So they've been going 2 years. They've already got their report came out last, I think it was just maybe October, their annual report, which showed a lot of progress being made. But we've also got other areas now. We've got about a third of all areas in Scotland, council areas in Scotland, doing elements of community wealth building, notably Clackmannanshire, Fife, Western Isles, South Lanarkshire, but there's about 5 or 6 others. Glasgow the cabinet just signed off I think it was a community wealth building charter or commitment. Dundee, I think, has done something similar recently. So the movement's growing. We have to go faster. We've got legislation coming up later in the parliamentary term, a potential community wealth building act that will further create fertile soil conditions to speed up community wealth building and those 5 elements we discussed earlier.
If so much is going on, how can we hear more about it? How do we get more messaging, and how does the community wealth building as a movement communicate what it's trying to do? Because it's up against kind of 40 years of neoliberalism, and we're really talking about creating a new paradigm here. And how do we actually do that?
It's a good point, a really good point, and an important thing. Firstly, we need product. So we can't have in America they say a cowboy with no cattle. We need to have the substance here, and that is what we're working on at the moment in terms of the proving the case. But we do need to get a hell of a lot better of singing about it, and I think there's a role for the economic development community through EDAS, particularly Economic Development Association of Scotland, who have got a programme of dissemination and training and so forth. I think there's a job for the wider media to see, when they talk about the well-being economy, to actually think it not just an ephemeral thing, but something that is actually practical through community wealth building, and start to, I think there's a job for ministers, there's a job for Scottish Government, there's a job for us all to start to say there is the art of the possible here. You know, it's how do we eat 40 years of neoliberalism? Like an elephant, one bit at a time. You know, we need to chip away at it, and that needs consistent messaging and consistent comms and consistent approaches that say we're on this journey. Um, I'm of the belief that progress happens through hard graft and work, and then it reaches a tipping point. I'm not someone who really believes that you can have like a concept and then people will just go like, "Oh, that was that," and boof. I'm more of a belief that you kind of need to chip away at things and build a kind of groundswell, and then you get the huge paradigm shift tipping point. There's a Brazilian philosopher and politician called Roberto Unger. He works at the Harvard Law School, and Roberto Unger talks about the moment we're in, and he says that this is the moment of demonstrating the epiphanies of possibilities against the forces of neoliberalism, the epiphanies of possibilities, because it's so omnipresent, that old neoliberalism, that you need to start to have those beacons, those little bits of light, and those epiphanies of possibilities foreshadow, he says, the bigger change. And I think that's what we need to do more, show those epiphanies of how, like what you said before about, William, you mentioned the electric, the company you mentioned in Barcelona. That's an epiphany of the possibilities, a different way of doing things, and it can work. We need more and more and more of them, and that will become almost rise up, and that will create then the tipping point. Unfortunately, in Scotland, we've also got arguably, a political context broadly, and a cultural, social context that is receptive to alternative. I'm not saying they're wholly bought in across the piece, but they're receptive to alternative. That's not the case in England. They're not receptive to the alternative. The epiphanies of possibilities are being put back in their box.
Okay, and that's really a shame to hear that. I was going to say, when you're talking about epiphanies, clearly for political and economics geeks, that epiphany is demonstrated by the Preston model, which you must have been involved with. Can you tell us about some of the fantastic results that have come from the Preston model?
Yeah, I was involved in Preston Model from day one, but obviously there's many, many hands and hearts involved in that. It's worth mentioning that it started from two things that came together by serendipity and chance. One was my own organisation, CLES, Centre for Local Economic Strategies, who had been exploring community wealth building and had been over to the States and looked what happened in Cleveland, which was run by the Democracy Collaborative, the organisation I now work for. And that was a big success, the Cleveland community wealth building activity. And we thought, how can we do that in the UK? And we were looking for a location that we could test case a sort of community wealth building pilot. Now, we tried a large city in the UK, but it didn't work out for many reasons. And then Preston were members of CLES. It's a smallish city, 130,000 people. It's got a university, it's got a college, 2 colleges, it's got a local authority, it's got all the anchors. And we thought, Preston would be good. At the same time, or even before then, the leader of Preston and the cabinet member for Preston were interested in ideas of the Mondragon model, cooperative development. And we were match made, if you like, and met with the political leadership, and we agreed to cook up a plan of doing a community wealth building anchor approach in Preston. So we assembled the anchor organisation. We did lots of research around spending patterns and where all the money went, and we found that of the £800 million across 6 anchor organisations in Preston, that 5% of the spend went to Preston companies, and 39% of the spend went to Lancashire companies. 5%, we've done other work, but 5% was really, really low. You know, Preston's a good-sized town, a city, probably, you know, but maybe a bit smaller than Dundee, and only 5% of all the spending of the two colleges, the local authorities, the university, was landing in Preston itself. So we end up changing practice of procurement, animating supply in Preston. Come on, get your bids in. And by over 3 years, it went up to 18% in Preston, which was £30 million brought back to Preston economy in 3 years. But in Lancashire, it was a £200 million shift from 39% to 80% to the wider Lancashire. That was worth about 1,400 jobs.
Wow.
Now, that's just the procurement pillar, of the font. They've also now the Lancashire Pension Fund, Lancashire Pension Fund has now invested in local hotels. Yeah, so they're divesting some of the money. They're divested from fossil fuels. They now have a fair wage, one of the real living wage places. So they have a whole range of organisations, not just public sector, who pay the real living wage. They now have an extensive cooperative development approach from run out of the University of Central Lancashire, UCLan, where they are looking to develop around 10 co-ops a year, I think it is. They've supported a number of social enterprise and community businesses. The council now owns the local market, which they've redeveloped. They're now owning the local cinema development. They've got a franchise in there, but they own the actual building. So they're taking that new municipalist stand, melding it with community wealth building. So they're on a journey, and they've been ahead of some of others. But North Ayrshire's catching up quite quickly. I'm hoping that Clacks Fife catch up quite quickly. You've got London Borough of Newham, you've got Wigan, you've got a whole range of places where this community wealth building is growing. And obviously the place that I'm working now in the States, quite significant community wealth building activity there now as well, including the city of Chicago and Somerville in Greater Boston.
And is there any way that you've identified to try and to make the process much more inclusive and outside of that kind of who you would expect to be involved in these types of movements?
That's a really good point, William. I've been familiar with the work of transition towns, and I've been down to Lewis and a place I've forgotten the name, begins with T, Totnes. So I'm familiar with the work of Rob and all that, and known them for a number of years, and big fan of it. I wouldn't quite personify it the way you say, but I know kind of what you mean. There is that sort of more affluent, liberal sort of mindset. It's not a class-based agenda, and neither is it particularly an economic system change. It's more coming from a different route, if you like, and it's got its beauties but also its flaws, like all things. Community wealth building is deeply aware of the importance of diversity and representation, and how it needs to actually involve the people who, the 99%, if you like, rather than the 1%. And we've got each of the places I've mentioned, there is a grassroots activism to it. We need to do more, and always can do more on that. In the States, it's very different. In States, community wealth building agenda is driven by racial and equity justice, equity and racial justice. So in Chicago, it's driven by an activist mayor, Lori Lightfoot, who comes from South, a black female mayor who comes from South West Chicago, and it's been driven out of the Office for Equity and Racial Justice, and very much focuses on grassroots cooperative development, decent workplace practices for Black and brown folks in South and West Chicago. It's similar in the more white working class agenda in Somerville in Boston. So there is a deep recognition that this is about a recalibration of economy away from the 1% to 99%, away from those who enjoy the fruits of the economy to those that don't enjoy the fruits of the economy, from those who are the perpetrators of injustice to those who suffer from the injustice. It's very much about a recalibration, a redirection of an economy to all the people, but also all the ills that the economy creates, including, of course, the climate crisis. For community wealth builders, the climate crisis is synonymous with the economic justice and racial justice crisis. So we understand that it's a Venn diagram. They're together, they're linked together. And we're not of the ilk that see the climate justice question is detached from questions of class or race or diversity. They're synonymous, they're linked, because climate injustice comes from the plutocrats and the extremes of wealth concentration. That's where it comes from. And unless we attack wealth, we will not address climate justice. Somebody's going to have to lose, and it will be the wealthy. It has to be. They're not going to be placed in the same position as the poorest. Of course, that's inhumane, but clearly they have to pay, and clearly they need to lose. 40 years of neoliberalism, how many years want to put to it, doesn't want strong democracy, because democracy threatens their own power. And the people are pissed off with representative democracy broadly. Local elections, you'll get turnouts of 30, 40%, because they know it doesn't make much difference, because who actually controls their life and the economy is not the politicians. It's the 40 years of embedded, ingrained, deepened, solidified neoliberalism. So I'm using those words, but people generally say, like, there's no flipping point. What's the point? Nothing ever changes anyway, because nothing will change, because the economy is driven by others, a few people, a few men. So we need to, that's why economic democracy is so important. That's why cooperatives and all that is so important, to give people a stake more in the economy, in their lives directly. That's why community parks are so important. That's why the new municipalist movement is so important. The sense that we have an agency, we have a volition. What we do can change things. By working with others can change things. By working with them, we can do something different in the economy. That participative democracy is the fuel for representative democracy. It's the fuel to create a resurgence of a representative democracy. But we're detached from that. So again, it's this bit about eating an elephant one bit at a time. We need to improve economic democracy. We need to give more people a say, and then we will see bigger representative democracy once there's that greater participative democracy. And we need to encourage participative democracy. And Scotland does. It's Community Empowerment Act. Yeah. It's new legislation may augment that. We've got a lot to do, but it's there. And also look at the turnout in the independence referendum. Massive. Yeah. So we're doing better than others. And so we've got a lot to do. But what I'm saying is we need to look at the epiphanies of possibilities and the hopes that are there, and clearly to give people more of a stake in the economy directly will have its democratic returns through the ballot box.
That leads nicely to my last question. Earlier, you'd stated that Scotland is kind of there's fertile soil there in Scotland, and you don't feel that in England. How does this play into Scottish independence and the place of Scotland currently in the Union?
United Kingdom is breaking up by the forces of lots of different things. The United Kingdom is increasingly anachronistic, right, to the context of our lives. Now, it's not just politics. There's other economic things going on and other social and cultural factors going on here. So you have to make a decision whether that anachronism can be brought to made relevant, right? Can it be made relevant? And how much effort it would take to make it relevant as a United Kingdom. And then if you think, well, I don't think it can, I think it would take too much effort to make it relevant, then you accept its irrelevance and you move to something that's better. And so from an economic point of view at this point in time, the more devolution, the more local control, the more control that we have as a people over the means of production and the fiscal dimensions of that, then the better. So, You know, I'm not wanting to put my mast on any particular political, but I'm saying, I'm kind of saying, at this moment in time, the crisis we have, we need to have more democracy and create that democracy closer to us and our people and our communities. It could mean, you know, that could mean an independent Scotland. It also could mean just a really, really, really strong devolution. I don't mean Devo Max. I mean Devo Max. Proper flipping, proper federalism of a real, you know, of a German kind. Sub-administrations below the landers. You know, but the general principle here is that, you know, I'm repeating myself, is the United Kingdom anachronistic? Yes. Can it be made more relevant? It could be. Might take a lot of effort. Perhaps we accept its irrelevance and work towards something that's a lot better, that devolves power, resources, and fiscal volition to the lowest level we can. I think the political act, like of joining volunteering in a community centre, is a political act. You know,
Absolutely.
it's part of demos. To be a friends of the local community park, that whole civil society action is politics. And I think the great places of the world seek to amplify and support that active citizenship. And it can manifest itself, of course, into like economic activity as well. The community centre becomes a community cafe. The community cafe becomes a community catering company. The community catering company becomes delivering meals to schools. Yeah, these things can grow. That's how economies grow. So I think from those small seeds, we need to support that active citizenship. And I think there's an economic dimension to it as well. And we can learn a lot from rural Scotland around all this. That self-sufficiency that comes in rural Scotland, and particularly the Highlands, I think is really important, where things from a seed of action, other economic and other social activities emerge.
Absolutely. I think that we have kept you long enough. I'd really like to thank you, Neil McEnroy, for joining us on Scotonomics.
Pleasure.
That was fascinating, Neil. Thanks very much. Hi, Kieran. Nice to see you again. Yeah, so when we interviewed Neil, I felt very lucky that he gave us an hour, and in the end we actually had a conversation for almost as long off camera as we did on camera, and we were even luckier to have some more insight into his work and his views on the economy, and I feel really lucky that we have got him again. So here he is. I'm going to bring him on stage. Hi, Neil.
Hi there, nice to see you again.
Hello.
Nice. Thanks so much for joining us. I wondered, we've got a couple of questions from the audience, which is good, but I wanted to start with your views on the Levelling Up proposals press release that I'm sure you scanned through today. What's your thoughts on that?
332 pages, so a big thing. Well, it's needed, isn't it? I mean, we know the big divides we've got across the UK. So I think what's interesting is that we've had 80 years of efforts to address an unequal UK. Way back to the Barlow Commission, started in 1938. So a long, long time. And so I think the Levelling Up White Paper, it's a bit underwhelming. I think it borrows a lot from the past. I don't think it's learnt from the past mistakes as much. It's successive governments have always had a bite at this, and this government's having a bite at it. It's a decent fist of it, I think, but it is underwhelming given the history of failures. And also we've got the climate crisis and a pandemic, and we need to make a big transition, a big transformation, a big step change. And I just don't think it offers that. It's a bit skimpy and a bit underwhelming. But in saying all that, there's some money, there's some resources. You know, we need to, in Scotland and our local authorities, bid into that, get as much as we can from it. But in terms of the bigger transformation we need, the bigger reset we need, we'll have to wait till another Levelling Up White Paper or some other policy before we can get that.
Yeah. No, that's interesting to hear. I know it's very superficial, but I always like doing a search and just on a word within a white paper to see how many times it mentions like the climate crisis or net zero or these types of things to really get a flavour for it. So I think I'll do that when I get a chance. We've just got a comment from Maureen here, which I thought was quite nice. Can you see that on screen, Neil?
Okay,
Yep.
It's a good comment. I like the epithet, I suppose. But is there a question there to speak to it?
No. That's just that's just a comment. One comment that we came up here was that we had, which question actually was a lot of the stuff you're saying is really important. But are we able to do this without a radical overhaul of corporate governance? And this is this idea of shareholder primacy and also what companies are expected to do and allowed to do. Are we able to do any of this stuff at a grander scale outside of the anchor organisations without really addressing the issues we have with corporate governance?
That's a good question. I think there's a spectrum. There's a minimalist approach to community wealth building, there's a maximalist. And I think we can do a lot around community wealth building with powers we have. We can do a lot. There is a need to change the behaviour of corporates, and that can be done without legislation. And many corporates are working to do the good thing. There's the whole B Corp movement. So there is existing changes that corporates are adopting in the light of the challenges. So, the question of, how much you can do is how fast corporate governance changes itself. And clearly, given climate crisis, if they don't change quick enough, there'll have to be intervention to make them change. But we have to be optimistic. I mean, a lot of corporates do good stuff, and we need to support them in that cultural shift. And sometimes cultural shift is better than coercion because it means that people really believe it when they make those shifts. So there is issues there, but at the end of the day, corporates have people in them, even shareholders are people, of course, and they can change behaviour. And I think we need to encourage that behaviour. But ultimately, we've got 8 years left of this decade to save the planet. We may have to go faster and deeper, and that might need more coercion.
Yeah, those are important points, and of course, to have the biggest influence, you have to change people's behaviour and have them to understand that there's a new paradigm taking place, and changing corporate governance and all these types of things might help, but not as effective as that really deep, meaningful change. Another one for our audience here. I think you can put this in as a question. Oh, sorry, I'll remove that. This one here.
That's a really interesting question, and beyond my knowledge, really. Well, not beyond my deep ken, but clearly, community wealth can be incorporated as part of legislation. And in the moment, in the there's this potential plans for a Scottish legislation, but the US, we're now working towards community wealth building legislation at a federal level at a very early stages. Clearly, any new nation, if there was, could write in elements of how wealth flows, who benefits from wealth within any constitution. So I think it's what I'm saying is, I think it can be certainly made, you can legislate for it. Whether you'd want it part of a constitution depends on the type of constitution you want. I mean, there's no way we're seeking amendments from the American Constitution to adopt community wealth building. That would be a big undertaking, and probably not necessary. So, yeah, I think the short answer is yes, but whether it's needed or not, I think we'd need to we'd be up to the dimension of the Constitution. I'm havering on this question, really. It's a tricky one, and I exposed my lack of knowledge pretty quickly in it.
We often actually get questions about the Constitution, and it is really something that for the movement, a lot of people think it underpins everything that we do, and that was a really good question. So thanks for having us.
I would say though, It would be so. It'd be good if all nations need a constitution, and the fact that UK doesn't have one that's written is a really bad thing. So constitutions are good. At least it's a benchmark.
Yeah,
Red lines.
I mentioned the social contract. I had a Twitter conversation today around pensions, and I said, there's a social contract that if you pay into a pension, you get money back. And someone said to me, can you send me a link to the social contract? And I said, yeah, it's double-sided. It's got the UK Constitution on the other side. And, I think we are in a situation where we are relying on a constitution enforces all of this and makes it less kind of ephemeral and out on the, for people to properly investigate rather than knowing exactly what's there. Kieran, have you got a question for Neil?
Yeah, so I'm going to start it with a statement. I mean, so at Scotonomics, we're busy trying to highlight things about weird things to do with economics, and also some of the lies that are very prevalent about economics. For example, that at a UK level, taxes don't really fund spending. So you said at the end of your talk, we need to improve economic democracy. Neil, do you think Scotonomics could help build and improve economic democracy?
Hey, look, we need to have a whole set of activities which start to get people to understand economics. So you're doing it already, I would say. In terms of economic democracy, I think the ideas that we can own things, land, buildings, economic activity, and have a real say in that, I think is really, really important to start to encourage people, opposed to just being employees, but to think that we can actually own more of stuff. I think to encourage and deepen unionization and different forms of participation in the workplace. So as educators and communicators, you already are providing a role, I think. I think to have dedicated sessions on economic democracy, dedicated sessions on co-ops, on mutuals, on land reform would be really good thing to have, because a lot of this, and we talked a lot I talked a lot in the talk, I was listening to it again there, thinking, talked a lot of theoretical stuff, really, some of it. At the end of the day, this is just opening up people's imagination of what they possibly can do within the economy. And I think that's a role you already do, but could do even more of.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a comment there just about, Neil's approach needs encouraging within educational system. And that's one of the points that I raised in our conversation was, how do we get more people to know about this? One thing I would like to say, building onto what you just said about this ownership, is we often feel, and I'm doing some research on forests at the moment, and I often feel that people think there's two choices. It's owned privately or it's owned by the state. And it was Andy Winkman who was talking about this, and he said in France, communities own forests. Currently, it's the minister, or the environment minister in England, similar in Scotland, who own the forest. It's the state who own the forest, and I think that's something that we've always been lacking within the Scottish culture. Is this idea that it's the community that should own resources? Does that feed into that community wealth building narrative that we need to start not just drawing power back from corporates, but also from the state?
I think that's right. I think there is a spectrum between fully publicly owned, public nationalisation, to privately owned, as a spectrum there. And I think we need to increase not just public ownership in some key public services, as I said in the talk, like care, but also increase the sense of community ownership of a whole range of economic activity on that spectrum. So very, very much so. And I think at the end of the day, the state is it's a bureaucratic manifestation of the community. We've organised the state because it's the best way of organising some things. But in some instances, maybe went too far in terms of how we bureaucratically organise things to get a better set of value returns. And that may be other forms of ownership beyond just direct public. The only proviso I'd put on that is that given climate crisis and the need to mobilise capital and activities at scale, at bureaucratic scale, we do need to not atomize things too much. You know, we do need to have big, powerful states working collectively together to address the climate emergency for this particular moment we're in. And hopefully it is the moment we're in, and there is another moment after this, because if we don't get it right, we're all doomed.
Well, absolutely, it's a balance, isn't it? Because I agree
Yes.
completely. You need the state to pull the levers, but the local community know best. It's not just that they should be involved, but a huge amount of research has gone into local communities understanding how best to make the most of the environments that they spend every second of every day in. So it is about finding that balance, I think, between the state and the community and the individual.
There's
Please,
one point in that, William, is that some on the right, some neoliberals love the idea of community and love the idea of community power, because that means then they don't have the state to get in the way of, in terms of legislation or regulatory practices. So there is a neoliberal communitarianism, it's called, which is this: let's abandon the state completely and just have corporates and communities. And that strain is alive and healthy in the UK. Not so much in Scotland, thankfully, but certainly the UK. So we have to watch a little bit about what you're opening doors to with this overemphasis on communities and community power. I think neoliberals love that too.
Yeah.
Very interesting point. Kieran, anything to say before we head off?
Yeah, I hope that Scotonomics can be part of that political and economic agora. And I just want to thank you again for coming on and joining us tonight. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I'll give the final word to Maureen, who's put a lot of really good comments in the chat here. People engaging is a big problem as they are fed up. Thanks all of you for engaging, and we really appreciate that.
Don't get fed up. Get busy.
Don't get fed up. Yeah, get busy. I like it. I like it. Neil, thanks for joining us again. It'd be great to see you in hopefully in a few months' time.
Yeah, all the best to you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Neil. Bye now. Well, as I said, very lucky to have Neil on with us again. Kieran, thanks very much for joining us. I know you've had a really busy day filming for a documentary. Just to let the audience know that we have an extended interview, which we're doing with most of our guests on our Patreon, and we also release that on a Monday rather than a Wednesday, and there's an audio version for each as well. So there's a lot more on Patreon. You get if you pay that little bit of money, but the main thing is to support us, to help us make more shows, more specials, and these documentaries, which we're spending a lot of time on. But we really appreciate you joining us. We'll always be free to air on Independence Live, the YouTube channel, and now on Facebook and Twitter. So thanks so much for your time tonight. Until next week, when we have my favourite episode so far, where we interview David McWilliams about Ireland. Kieran and I both follow him quite a lot on social media, so it was really good that we got to spend some time with him. And he said some fantastically profound things about Scotland as an independent country. So hope you can join us next week. Until then, bye for now.
Good night.
Bye now.